Welcome to a special one-hour edition of The Notebook. I'm Barry Craig. Like the Swallows to Capistrano, an old friend has come back to talk about one of our favorite subjects, and that is Major League Baseball. He is Leon Wurth, scout for the Milwaukee Brewers, and we also have, in addition, someone who remembers me when I was thin and had hair, and that was a long time ago. He is Joey Fosko, sports columnist for the Paducah Sun. Welcome to the program.
Good to see you, Barry.
We've decided to double team Leon, and since I'm the host, I get to go first, and then Joel, you can jump right in, and we'll grill him. We'll grill him. I think we're in agreement that the biggest story out of Major League Baseball in 2011 has to be the rise of the St. Louis Cardinals, much to the joy of many local folks here, and the fall of the Boston Red Sox. Care to comment on that?
I guess I have to. Yes, I think with a month to go in the season, you'd have probably named 10 or 12 teams that you'd have said, well, if I'm going to bet Vegas and who's going to win the World Series, they'd have picked some other team other than the Cardinals. But and you have to take your hat off to them. It's they as I like to say, one foot was in the grave 9 or 10 times, and they kept coming out. And I think that actually played well for them in the playoffs. They had been there, they'd been on the brink, almost nothing to lose, nobody expect us to be here type attitude, and I watched them play against the Brewers in the playoff, and they had that attitude, and they were playing well, and a lot of things went their way, and as we've talked about baseball, get hot at the right time.
It's amazing. The Red Sox, and all of this came out, I think, after the season was over, all this dissension, the beer and chicken in the clubhouse and all this stuff. I mean, that must have had an effect on this. What's your insight on what happened to the Red Sox?
I think that's overblown. I have no idea. I think that, you know, Francona's been there a long time. And
Don't you think he was a good manager, Francona?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I think that, and I don't, you know, with clubhouses and stuff that goes on and whatever, I don't know. If this never would have came out if they won. And,
Exactly.
And my question is, I mean, it's not like Francona was his first or second year. So if whatever it was happening, I would be shocked if it didn't happen the year before that. I don't know. I have no knowledge of that. But just how sometimes these things happen, and when you lose, I've been on there too, all of a sudden stuff you're doing, hey, you know, somebody's got to pay the price, and it comes down, and that's just the way it is. Maybe in all walks of life, but particularly in sports. Well, look what, no wonder, you know, and people pick up, it's a good story, and yeah, no wonder they lost. Well, I don't know, maybe they did that last year too, and they won, I don't know, I have no idea. But you never hear about it. It's winning in sports, as with a lot of things going on in today's world, winning sometimes you brush aside a lot of stuff that happens, and nobody pays any attention to it.
As a member of the media, I looked at that whole situation. It was a media frenzy, media looking for a scapegoat for a team that was genuinely.
And I think the Boston fans were looking for a scapegoat.
I think so too. I think the media reflected the fans in that regard. Boston was one of the best teams in baseball for 5 months of the season. Fell apart in September. I think fans start looking for scapegoats and places to point fingers. And I'm with Leon. This stuff never would have come out if the Red Sox had gotten to the postseason. But when that down period where they weren't in the postseason and it's going on, they start pointing fingers at different places. And I think it just all came to a head with, you know, the Boston media has gotten to the point, it's almost like New York. I mean, they're in a frenzy up there because the Red Sox now, if they've won 2 World Series the last decade, they're expected to win every year. I used to call them Yankees light. They're not even really Yankees light anymore. They're almost like Yankees medium now. I mean, they're not quite the Yankees scale, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
And the media frenzy up there is just amazing. And you know, tapping now, they're going to have an overhaul of the organization. They've already lost their general manager. They lost their manager, and I think a lot of it was
Papelbon's gone.
And Papelbon's gone too.
Yeah.
Another Phillies overpay, but but Boston, I think what's happened in Boston, they got away from being the Red Sox. They tried to be like the Yankees too much the last few years, spending for free agents. That spending a little bit too much money for guys they probably didn't need, and I think it's kind of come back to bite them a little bit.
What do you think? Francona leaves, Epstein leaves. What's your take on that? I mean, it sounded like they were just determined to clean house.
Yes, I think Joey, I can't say it better than Joey. It's until you're up there and around that. You know, Francona was on a couple of the playoff games, and they asked him, and Philadelphia, which I cover a lot, advanced them for a lot. The fans are not, the difference between the Cardinal fans and the Philly fans was stark, because I did both, and in the playoffs. And Francona managed in Philly before he did Boston. They asked him, he said, well, you know, Philly was tough. Philly's tough, you know, they booed Santa, the whole deal. But he said, in comparison to managing Boston, you know, he needed a break. And a lot of people have speculated that he won't manage next year and just take a year off, because the pressure in Boston to win it's just like, you know, if you don't, if he said, you know, if it's ball one, you're all of a sudden you're in trouble in Boston. People start booing in the first inning, you know, ball one.
Yeah.
He said, at least in Philly, you know, you lose a couple of games, which is two of the tougher places to manage because of the fans and New York. But yeah, I think that, and probably with Theo too, I think that they won a couple. He said, you know what, it's probably a good time to go. It's just the quality of life after a while, I think, that they say. And where else to go but Chicago? I mean, if you want to get your statue put up, if you go there and you win, I mean, what's better? I think the challenge of that, where it's opposite, and it's like 180 in Boston, where like now they expect them to win all the time, every time. I mean, who needs that? I mean, after you like it, you go through it. But if then you say, well, there's another iconic place, Chicago, where the fans are there, but they're lovable losers, blah, 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 whatever. But if you do win there,
oh yeah,
I mean, you know, it's like coming in after you know, replacing a legend or replacing, you know, a coach that's, you know, never won. You got nowhere to go but up. The fans' expectations are
if you're Theo Epstein and you break the Red Sox curse, and then you can come and end the Cubs 100-plus year drought. Yeah, you've pretty much punched your ticket to Cooperstown, wherever else.
I kind of thought that Francona might follow him there.
I think the Cubs are in a situation right now, they're not immediately contending. I think Francona is Major League Baseball's Bill Cowher, the ex-coach of the Steelers, who can kind of wait around and see if the right job opens up. And he's in demand because he's got the cachet to demand that. I think Francona, and I think he probably needs a break. He's had some personal life difficulties. He's had some health difficulties that he probably needs to deal with a little bit. He can probably take some time off and recharge, and let's be honest, when he wants to get back in the game, he'll have a job somewhere.
Somebody will. Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of wondered if the Cubs were kind of giving, I wondered if Theo Epstein was giving Francona time to decide if he wanted the job or not.
Yeah.
But I don't, maybe he might not be ready for it, and the Cubs aren't immediately going to contend. It's going to be 2 or 3, 4 year project with them. Yeah. And Francona, I think, would rather go somewhere where he could probably win right away.
Yeah. La Russa leaves the Cardinals. Leaves on top. You go out on top.
Goes out on top, and Hall of Fame manager, and it's a good way to go, particularly when nobody really thought that, and you know, your team is not supposed to be that good, and you do it. So he's very glued in during the game. So he makes a lot of moves. And speaking of moves, I mean, you know, if the Cardinals had lost, I mean, you know, it's and he's Hall of Fame manager, does the thing, but you know, there's the gaffe in Game 6 with the wrong guy coming in, which now is swept under the rug, and we're talking about winning cures all. You tell me if the Cardinals lose that game, it may be 180 on Tony. Well, it's time for him to go.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're just telling, but no, I mean, he won the World Series, and he's
looking
206.
Looking back, and I ask Leon this: has there ever been a manager that's had more of an impact on the way the game is managed now? The way we manage bullpens now, I think, is a direct descendant of the way he handled the Oakland bullpen in the late '80s with all the matchups and 6-7 relievers and lefty-righty stuff. And other managers did that before, but La Russa kind of took it to an extreme. Has any manager had an impact on the way the game is managed like he has?
He has made an impact. I guess there was matchups before that, and I still don't think that teams can afford to or will to that excess that he matched up.
I agree.
I don't think you can afford to. I know when I was in St. Louis and when I was doing the Phillies and the Cardinals, and the usher, about the 6th inning, he came out and she says, "Okay, get ready." This is what we've got to. So he was kind of loved and not loved because a lot of, you would hear
the first 6 innings take an hour and a half. The last 3 innings take an hour and a half sometimes.
Right. So, but to Joey's question, yeah, I think he had an impact, and it certainly worked. It doesn't work all the time, but it certainly worked in the playoffs. Yeah. I mean, a lot of those guys, Arthur Rhodes, I mean, all those guys performed. Everybody the Cardinals brought in, it worked, and these guys had mixed success during the year. Yeah. There was a lot of games that the bullpen lost.
Yeah. I think the Cardinals are a testament to, and Leon watches, we watch baseball all season long. The Cardinals of the last 2 months were a much better team than the Cardinals of the first 4 months of the season.
Well, he said on this show years ago, it's the team that gets hot.
And the trades they made at the trading deadline made them a better team right now. And they got a break. Atlanta had the collapse in September. They got in the playoffs at the very end. But I think it's testament to just how much of a crapshoot the postseason is in baseball, because a lot of times it takes 2 guys to get hot with the bat, a couple of pitchers to get hot. David Freese, of all people, who nobody had heard of David Freese nationwide until about 2 months ago. Yeah. And now he's World Series MVP, and everybody knows who he is.
He's from St. Louis, isn't he?
He's a St. Louis area kid. Yeah. A guy they traded Jim Edmonds for about 3 or 4 years ago. Right. Not much was thought of that deal at the time. Edmonds was kind of an iconic figure in St. Louis, and they traded him for David Freese. And who's this guy? He's a hometown kid, but he's turned out to be, and David Freese is not a great player, but he's a serviceable player, and he happened to get hot at the right time. And let's face it, I mean, if it's not for David Freese getting hot in the postseason, the Cardinals probably aren't even in the World Series, to be honest.
And, going back to the World Series, I mean, the Cardinals are, twice one strike away from losing the whole thing. And it's almost like the baseball gods just decided, well.
Yeah, and Texas's bullpen, I mean, I talked to our scouts that were on Texas, and they were like, boy, this is the team, and the bullpen was great, and they weren't great against the Cardinals, so go figure.
Yeah, I mean, Cliff Lee's last 10 starts, he had 7 or 8 runs in his last 10 starts, or some ungodly figure, and he gets beaten the first game he pitches in the postseason by the Cardinals. I mean, postseason, everything changes in the postseason, and now that it used to be baseball was kind of like the BCSs in college football. They only got the top 2 or 4 teams in the playoffs. Now we're letting 8 teams in. We're going to let 10 in now with the additional wild card. Florida Marlins have won 2 World Series from the wild card spot. We've had the Cardinals won the World Series in 06 with an 83-win team that got hot at the end and got some breaks along the way. We've changed the way. The Yankees won all these titles back in the 50s and 60s and all that stuff. But the Yankees were dominating baseball. But back then, only 2 teams made the World Series. I mean, it's only 2 teams made the postseason. Now we've spread out, shared the wealth a little bit, and you're going to get teams like the Marlins and the Cardinals with 83 wins, and certain teams that aren't the best teams during the season, but in the postseason they're going to find ways to win ball games.
You think that's good or bad for baseball?
Well, it's yes.
I think it's good for baseball.
It's good and bad. It's bad for the purist. It's bad to compare the records in the Yankees from the 50s and 60s and say, and what we've said, the best team doesn't always win over the whole season. So in baseball, the beauty of it, the bad part of it, the beauty of it is over 162 games, it's a long, long haul, and there's something to be said for the teams that go through the ups and downs and get there. But with the way baseball is, and for people in the game that have, like me, that have jobs, it's a moneymaker with the more wild cards. It's been proven. I mean, Bob Costas, everybody that was against it, and when the wild card and everything came out.
I was on that camp too.
I was on the camp too from the purist standpoint, but when you look at the money and the excitement and for the good of the game today, it's good because it gets people interested, people talk about it. And the bottom line is people go on with their lives after it's over and say, hey, boy, I really enjoyed it. I didn't watch, a lot of people, well, I don't watch the baseball much, but boy, I really like the World Series and it was this. It's exciting. So from that standpoint, if that's the bottom line and it's marketing dollars now and that's the bottom line, it's good. So overall, I'd say it was good. It's things change, and you just say, okay, we'll roll with it. But I think baseball's doing the right thing because there's no question. You look at basketball, football, every other sport, people don't pay attention to the regular season like the purists do. But most people, when the playoffs and everything get involved, they do that, and then you got more teams, you got more cities, more coverage, more money. It's good for the game.
The Cardinals played 18 games in the postseason, which is the truer test of what the team is. Is it 162 in the regular season, or is it 18 in the postseason? But that's the way baseball is set up now, and frankly, I like it. I mean, it's good for fans. It's good for interest. But people remember those 18 games more than they do the 162.
That's true.
And Leon, who works on the inside of this, I mean, really, is that kind of the opinion in baseball now that, hey, all we can do is get to the postseason and just hope it works out for us?
Sure. When we talk about, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to help our team next year, and all that? You can't. You get there. Most teams. Maybe the Yankees or the Red Sox. You say, okay, we're going to get there. It's a given, although it's not. But it's more likely than not. Probable. Okay, we'll get players that are playoff type players, or not just guys that put up numbers in the regular season, but guys that are good against the number 1, 2, and 3 starters, which is what you see, which I've argued a lot that the reason the Yankees were good back then is that we had hitters of that ilk that played well against good pitching, and that's all you're going to see. But to the point of, when we built the team to get to the playoffs. And that's about all you can do. You can say, if you get there, then it's kind of a crapshoot now. But it was a hitting World Series this year. Last year, in the last few years, last year particularly with the Giants, it's all pitching, and I would take pitching almost every year. I think but this year was. I think the Cardinal hitters do not get credit. Everybody talks about this and that and the other thing. I want to tell you from watching them, I think they were the most underrated. And I think McGuire, I thought their hitters were prepared. I mean, I scouted the Phillies, I scouted them, I saw our club, I saw a lot of teams. I don't know if it's by happenstance, but you got Freese and Alan Craig and people you don't hear of, and they're not easy outs. Now, like Joey said, sometimes it happens, they just got hot, but they did a heck of a job against good pitching, and they were tough outs, the whole lineup. I mean, you got Holiday and Berkman and Pujols in the middle, but I think the rest of their team was very underrated, and their hitters had great at bats.
And they led the league in runs scored. So I mean, they were obviously good offense all year long. And this goes back to Tony La Russa too. I think one of the best things La Russa, the best qualities of La Russa as a manager, I think throughout his whole career. Tony La Russa seemed to have a knack for using part-time guys and finding ways to maximize their production in certain roles. He's had a long history of finding roles for guys that they can succeed. Alan Craig is one example of that. John Jay, I think, when he was a 4th outfielder, was kind of that way. La Russa seems to have a good idea of how to spot guys. He's gotten mileage out of players that no other teams have gotten mileage out of.
Well, Lance Berkman, when he was with the Yankees, didn't. I was astonished at him in the World Series with the Cardinals. I thought, he didn't do that well for the Yankees.
Well, he lost some weight. He had to go play the outfield. He lost some weight. His knees were. He had a bad knee in 2010 as well, which was a problem as well. But he revitalized his career and said, I don't think necessarily you can attribute that to La Russa and the way he was used. Berkman's always been a very productive player. He just had a bad year in 2010. He got things turned around. But the part-time players, that's one thing Tony La Russa has always been tremendous at, is getting mileage out of guys that, I look at Aaron Miles, who frankly is not a very good ball player in my estimation. The Cardinals got at least some use out of him, and the Cubs pay for him and he can't hit. And it's just amazing. There's a difference in the way guys are used sometimes. Certain managers have a knack for doing that.
Well, I think we've talked about this lots of times before. The thing about baseball, it's so much more of a mental game than football. In football, if you're big and mean and tough, you're going to be good. But in baseball, there are all these intangibles, which is why it's my favorite sport, because there are so many intangibles. It's like, as I said, you think, well, in the case of Lance Berkman, he's older with the Cardinals, but he did better with the Cardinals than he did with the Yankees. Well, why? This is the part that I find so fascinating.
Well, it could be a change of scenery. It's and who knows why. I don't know why, but I'm going to guess. Again, I thought the Cardinal hitters were very prepared, and I liked the way they approached it. And maybe they made a small adjustment and said, you know, Lance, when we played you with Houston, here's what you did. And I don't know if it's McGuire or whoever.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you start using this approach again? And that's all it takes sometimes, because sometimes, you know, hitters, and that's what good coaches do, you steer them back and say, and to have guys that are smart enough to say, well, I don't know why this guy's doing it. And some guys are like mechanics, and they go, you know, when you did this, this happened. And the guy goes, really? He goes, yeah. And sometimes they don't have the aptitude to make the change. They just go do it. But sometimes there's more of a, some guys just gel better, mesh better with some hitting guys or pitching guys, whatever, and they say, you know, I look at your film, or when you played us, we couldn't get you out when you did this. And he goes, really? And he goes, yeah. So maybe he starts doing that. When he didn't even know. So that's why good coaches are good coaches.
For all the grief Mark McGuire took his first year as the hitting coach, you didn't hear anybody complaining this
Oh,
year?
no, nothing succeeds like success.
Yeah, and I have no idea. I don't really know. All I can say is what I viewed and what I saw, and I said, you know, because I'm sitting there trying to say, okay, we can get this guy out doing this, this, and this, and they go, well, how do you pitch him? And you go, you know, just this, and you know, if you leave it over here, and some guys have bigger holes than others, and somebody, I just, you know, like you said, I said, well, Freeze, Craig, I mean, these guys aren't like, you know, they're not Pujols. Who are these guys? And they could have been hot, but I liked their approach. I thought they had a really good idea of what they were doing.
Mm-hmm. It was '99 that you scouted the Braves for the Yankees, wasn't it?
I believe that's right, yeah.
And I remember we talked after, in fact, I think that's the first time you were on the show, and I asked you what it was about the Braves hitters that you observed, and you said they were impatient, very impatient hitters. Were the Cardinal hitters much more patient?
Yeah, they were very patient. They had a good idea. And that's normally, you know, hitters just aren't born patient. Normally, there's some on a smaller level at Murray when I coached hitters, is that, you know, it's extremely hard to teach pitch recognition, to teach working the count. You know, this is a pitch you can hit, but because you've got less than a second, half a second to make up your mind when you see it. So this doesn't happen by only the great hitters, you know, like Pujols are guys that just, you know, see it. Everybody else it's you've got to grind it, and you know, the guys that overachieve, I guarantee you, do that. They know what they can do, can't do, and they've been, you know, like Army mules, they've been really taught how to do it, because it's a really finite thing. Really finite.
Oh, it is. It is.
And you know, and it's something that guys, the good hitters that weren't blessed with, you know, the hand-eye and strength of Pujols and Mantle and all those guys, that there are guys in Hall of Fame, you know, the Tony Gwynns and guys like that, that just average guys and made themselves great, and that's part of the deal. So yeah, and I think patience is a big deal, because they say, oh, it looks good, I'm going to swing at it. And can't hit that pitch. You're going to ground out to shortstop every time. So the good hitters, they'd lay off unless it's 2 strikes. So it's easy to talk about and do, but in the heat of the moment, and there's 50,000 people yelling in the playoffs, and you know, sometimes they change too. You know, I saw some of our hitters go away from what they've been doing because of the situation. They were trying too hard. You know, they wanted to do this or that. So it takes years. It takes a lot of doing. I know it's maybe boring to the crowd here, but to you, I'm telling you, it's like every other thing you get into. There gets to be very finite things. And I thought, you know, I just don't think the Cardinals hitters by happenstance were all that patient. I don't think you just do that. I think somebody was like, and they were working on it. And I think it came to fruition late in the season.
Well, Mark McGuire was that kind of hitter. Mark McGuire was a pretty patient hitter who handled. He knew what pitches he could handle and what he could do with them. That was his approach as a hitter. And a lot of times you see teams will generally, especially if a hitting coach has been there long enough to kind of instill that philosophy, you'll see teams reflect that.
On the topic of Mark McGuire, do you think this helped his cause for the Hall of Fame, or you think he'll never get in?
Joey's probably got a better feel for that than
Just
me.
an opinion. What do you think?
I'm one of these people. I don't take the steroid stuff into account at all. I just feel, as I look at it, as baseball had no rules about it. These were players trying to get an edge, just like guys took greenies back in the '60s. And the reason we have steroids, I've heard people say, well, old-time players wouldn't have taken steroids. Bull. If we had steroids back then, they would have taken it, trying to get an edge. Mark McGwire, I think, was a Hall of Fame caliber player. I don't think he's ever going to get in. There's going to come a time where the baseball writers have to decide, are we just going to bar everybody from this era because of the suspicion of steroids, or are we going to let these guys in? Barry Bonds is the best example of that. There's no question that Barry Bonds is one of the greatest players of all time. Nobody disputes that. I don't know if he'll ever get in the Hall of Fame. Barry's attitude didn't help himself a lot of times in that case. But Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, those type players, Rafael Palmeiro, guys that have Hall of Fame numbers, so to speak, and are considered maybe Hall of Fame caliber players, a lot of them aren't going to get in. And Mark McGwire, I think, is one of the guys that deserves to be in that probably won't.
Well, I think if you go back to steroids, you cannot make a direct cause and effect. You take steroids, you hit 40 more home runs. You can't medically say that. I mean, it's probably true, obvious. But you can't make a cause and effect.
I think the impact, steroids, a guy doesn't hit better. I don't know if a guy's hit better because of steroids, but I think they probably stay in the lineup more and they stay in the field more often. Mark McGwire remember when the Andro controversy came out, Mark McGwire said he took Andro to help him recover from his workouts. Barry Bonds, the moment whatever Barry Bonds was taking, when he quit taking, is when he started having knee problems and couldn't play anymore, and couldn't play every day. I think steroids did more to keep guys on the field
for
and
endurance,
keep guys healthy, maybe more than making them better, more productive players.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, if you're on the field more often, you're probably going to be more productive. But I think like on a per at bat basis or whatever, I don't know that made Barry Bonds a better hitter to do whatever he was supposedly doing, but it kept him on the field longer, and that made him more productive to his team.
Well, it'll be interesting to see in the next few years. Now, obviously, this program is going to be dated because everything is fluid. The Hot Stove League is going. We got the free agents, trades, and all this stuff. And again, this may be dated 2 hours from now. Well, let's talk about Albert Pujols. Is he going to stay in St. Louis, in your all's opinion?
Yes.
Well, that was quick.
I agree. I think he's going to stay. I don't think that. I think the major markets, L.A., Chicago's. Joey had talked about that. They're both in a little bit of disarray. New York and Boston are kind of out of the picture because they're American League, and both first basemen they've got are somewhat comparable. Gonzalez may be the best. If I had to take a guy, I'd probably take him. So the Yankees and Boston are kind of out, and that's usually what drives the market. So now you're talking about, can somebody beat what the Cardinals have offered Pujols? And not, smart money says if somebody gets close to equal, why wouldn't he stay in St. Louis? And I'm like Joey, I just don't know that teams have that type of money for that length of time.
Boston and the Yankees aren't going to pay $20 million a year for a DH, which is what they're going to get with Pujols. Not that he would be the DH, but they've already got primetime first baseman to share with the Yankees. Gonzalez with the Red Sox. All you're going to do is sign a guy to fill a DH spot. So they're not going to pay that. I thought the Angels at one time might be that kind of team, but they took on Vernon Wells' contract, which is the worst contract in baseball, and he's making about $20 million for the next few years. I don't know how many teams are left that can pay Pujols what he wants to play for him.
As we speak today, I think the Marlins, from what I had read, had made him a pretty lucrative offer. But again, to me, Albert Pujols, he's to the Cardinals what Derek Jeter is to the Yankees. He's the new Stan Musial with the Cardinals. Would that, do you think? I think in the case of Jeter, it does. I think Jeter would rather play in New York than anywhere. Does Pujols, you think, feel the same about the Cardinals? This is my team. I want to be here till I retire.
He says he does. And I think this free agency is a test of that. It's just how you've been saying all this time you want to play in St. Louis, you want to be a Cardinal. This is the test of him. I mean, there's no question. He wants to get the money. He wants to cash in. Most players don't get to do this twice in their career. This is going to be Albert Pujols' last big payday. He wants to cash in the best he can. Circumstances, his age, whatever, might make it. I don't think he's going to get the money he wants to get. And the Cardinals, it's a PR disaster for them if he leaves.
Oh, it would, yeah.
You know, and you know, Milwaukee's gone through this with Prince Fielder. They would love to have him back, but they can't afford him. And the Cardinals, who have a little bit more money to spend than Milwaukee, Pujols is such a fixture in that franchise. He's the face of the franchise for Cardinal fans.
Exactly.
Of our generation, he is the Cardinals. Oh. He is worth much more to the Cardinals to sign than he would be to some other team.
But that'd be the same with Jeter, too, yeah.
To a certain extent, yeah, I think the same thing applies. He's more valuable to the Yankees than he is to somebody else.
On the subject of Fielder, prognosticate, what is his future?
Very doubtful with us because of we've already spent some money on some other guys that we had offered him earlier. I would, you know, Cubs have been talked about. Washington. He's the poor man's Pujols, and he got the same problem, except he's less of a defender. So he's more of an American League guy.
He's quite a bit younger though, which helps.
But he's not as good a shape as.
Sure.
So in 5 years, is he going to be like a 40-year-old or 32-year-old? So there's some issues there, but he'd had a heck of a year. I think Seattle in the American League would be a dark horse that might come out of nowhere because Jack Zarinczyk was our amateur scouting director and who was responsible for signing him is now the GM in Seattle, and Seattle has got great pitching and woeful hitting. So that would be my guess.
Isn't Baltimore been mentioned? Is that a possibility with Fielder too?
Baltimore's been mentioned.
Yeah.
I think more American League. He's probably
he can slide to the DH role.
Slide to the DH role.
Assuming we still have a DH role years from now.
Yeah. So, but it would be a shock if we got back involved. I don't think that he's inclined to give us a hometown discount.
Like I said, this is his one time to cash in. I mean, not many, you know, how many players get a chance to do this more than once?
Right.
And the one time you become a free agent, you're a big name in the market, you want to make the most of it.
If we can, let's talk about your greatest Major League signee, Jorge Posada. The Yankees have made it plain that he will not be coming back. Your thoughts on that, looking back on his career?
Well, I think that it's a business decision from what the Yankees are concerned. I understand it. I believe he's 40 years old. He's a catcher, and he can't. I don't think he caught maybe, but what?
Not sure he caught a game this year. Actually, he was just DH in first base. I think.
I thought he did catch a game or two, but anyway, I think he threw. I remember him going out to the mat. It was unusual. I thought it was 1 or 2 games, but anyway, the point is that he's and his bat is to the point where, as a first baseman, he's had a great career. I don't really see him going and trying to keep playing. I think he's retired.
Wouldn't you think the Yankees would offer him something in the front office or something in the organization?
I think that's possible. I think that's possible. I mean, you know, you don't see Jeter and he and Rivera were of that group, along with Bernie Williams, who's long since retired, that were original Yankees, stay with the Yankees through all the good years and everything. That I would think so. I would think that there's. I'm not sure what Jorge wants to do. I don't know if he wants to coach. I don't know.
He may take a year just to decide.
Well, I mean, I'm with Leon on that. He's a Yankee icon. He's not Jeter probably in the eyes of Yankee fans.
But he was one of the core 4.
But he was, and I mean, this guy was a immensely very underrated player, I think, for the majority of his career, because he got overshadowed by guys like Jeter and Bernie Williams and Rivera. But Posada was one of the best catchers of our generation, one of the best, a good hitter, very productive, very durable. I mean, he had a great career. It's no shame to. He's playing the major leagues at 40 years old. How many guys get to do that?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Go back and tell the viewers again how you signed him. It's a great story. Have you heard this story?
I don't know if I've heard all the details.
Tell us. It's a great story how you signed Jorge Posada, this great all-star major league catcher. Because when you saw him, he wasn't a catcher, was he?
No. He was a shortstop in a junior college, and
was it Decatur, Alabama?
Yeah, it was Decatur, Alabama. where he played. And
so you were the Yankees amateur
John
scout.
C. Calhoun. Yeah, I was the amateur scout. And actually, he had, back in those days, they don't have it anymore, but they had draft and follows, where if you drafted a kid out of high school and he went to a 2-year school, junior college, the team that drafted him had control of him or until a week before the next draft in early June. So you had late May to sign the kid. And we actually had drafted him out of Puerto Rico. And so I inherited him the first year. And, you know, they said, okay, so he was playing shortstop, and I mean, you know, he was well advanced of the kids that I was watching him play in Tennessee and there. I mean, he was shortstop, and he had a gun, you know, I know as a catcher in his older, he couldn't throw much, but he could throw, and he had all the actions at shortstop. He just couldn't run very good. I mean, he ran okay. But he had a home run from the left side and the right side the first time I saw him. So my boss says, what do you want to do with this kid? And I said, well, I'd like to sign him. He said, well, where do you want to play him? And I said, well, he's not a shortstop, but he could probably play second or third, you know. And he might play outfield. He was a good athlete. So the Yankees, his dad was a scout for the Rockies at the time. So I think we offered him a small amount of money, and they said no. And so we said, well, he's just testing the waters to see what's going to be offered. The Rockies are going to sign him because his dad, they're drafting. So he said, no, he's not ready to go. His dad said, no, he's not ready to sign. Doesn't want to play. So he went back home, and he went back in the draft again. And lo and behold, he goes 23 rounds, and nobody drafted him. They called me, and I go, and so he's going to go to junior college again, which means he's eligible to be drafted and follow material again, which means draft him, and I get to watch him for another year, and nobody else can sign him. I can watch him.
So he was a freshman when you saw him?
When I was a freshman, when I saw him. So now we draft him again. So now I officially draft this kid because now we draft him again, and we follow him again. So we did it twice. First time was by a scout in Puerto Rico. We decided not to sign him. I was shocked because I thought, well, you know, the kid wants to sign, you know, he'd sign, but he didn't. So he comes back to junior college. And so, this is probably a longer version than I told you the first time, but so anyway, he didn't have a very good year his sophomore year. He had, University of Alabama had signed him, and
for his junior and senior year.
Yeah. So my boss says, well, what do you want to do with him? I said, well, I want to sign him. And he goes, and my boss did say, he says, now
who's your boss at this point?
At this point, a guy named Bill Livesey, who is back with the Yankees now, and who was responsible for a lot of the big four that we signed. Very sharp baseball man.
Was he the minor league director at the time?
He has been minor league director. He was the pro scouting director also at the time. So,
okay.
So he said, well, he said, what? I said, he can't play shortstop. He said, why? I said, well, he can't go get the ball. I mean, he doesn't have the range for it. He's got the arm, but he can't go get it. He says, well, what about center field? No. And he says, well, I said, he can really hit and he can really throw. What do you like about him? I said, he can really hit and he can really throw. And he says, well, and I'll leave out a couple of the words he said, but he said, you know, they say he called a little bit in the last summer back in Puerto Rico when he went home. And he said, if he can't go get the ball, but he can hit, he says, we'll put him in a position where the ball comes to him. True story.
Yeah.
So we sign him, and we go to, I go to Puerto Rico, talk to the mom and the dad. I go to their house. They go, I hadn't really traveled out of the, well, that's not out of the country, but it's away, different continent. So I fly down, land in San Juan. There's dead planes everywhere on the side when I'm landing, you know, and that's like my first experience with this. It was really so. Jorge comes, picks me up. You know, the streets are this wide instead of this wide. And he's driving me back to the house, and so we talk, and so we eventually signed. He wanted to sign, and for not very much money, 30-some thousand at the time. So, and gave him a couple years of college, whatever, and so.
So after you signed him,
he plays second base the first year. We say we're going to send him to instructional ball, which after the season we send him down to Florida, get a catching guy, and he catches. And I remember a couple of scouts, one being a Cardinal scout at the time, told me, I was at a fall game in Alabama, and he said, hey, I just got back from instructional ball. So your boy Posada catching and trying to catch an instructional ball said, I got a real good look at him because he kept coming back to the fence chasing the ball all the time. Now, as a scout, there's stuff like that you never forget. Because basically he was dissing me going, yeah, good sign.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, a really good sign.
Yeah.
So that's how, and Jorge had unbelievable makeup work ethic, you know. I mean, I knew he was good, but he's off the charts as far as, and you just get fortunate, you know. He was a good kid, but unbelievable. I mean, you know, to catch is not the most fun thing for somebody to do. It's probably a smart thing to do because there's not that many good catchers. We had talked about Matheny a little bit earlier, and he couldn't really hit, but he could really catch and throw, and those guys are still valuable, and they're still around. Jorge could hit, was probably more of an offensive guy than a defensive guy, but he was adequate behind the plate.
I mean, you draft a 23rd round guy, and he turns into maybe a Hall of Fame catcher. I mean,
It's a great
doesn't happen
story.
very often.
It's a great
doesn't
story.
Yeah,
happen
it doesn't
very
happen.
often.
It doesn't happen very often. So
Yeah.
people ask me, and I go, I don't know, just sometimes you're lucky.
Yeah. I remember when they
But I had a few scouts laugh at me for it. He was not. It wasn't. And I mean, he went 23 rounds, and we thought, well, he had a good year his freshman year, and so I was a little surprised.
There are a lot of catchers in the major leagues who are moved from other positions.
Yeah.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
converted
That happens.
guys.
That happens a lot.
Sure,
So.
sure. That's and when he was interviewed in Sports Illustrated, I remember you were quoted in an article about him, and you mentioned about his work ethic and what had good. He was just a great guy.
Yeah, he broke his
overall.
leg at Prince William in high A ball. When he was moving up, he missed a lot of time. It was a bad play at the plate, collision play, and they didn't know if he was going to come back. He came back from that. Was catching the big leagues, you know, 2 years after that.
Yeah.
And you know, Girardi was his mentor.
He sure was.
Girardi was his mentor. And the other part of that tandem in '96 was that they traded two of my guys that I had signed, Steve Shoemaker, who didn't make the big leagues, and Mike Dejean, who did, traded both those guys to the Rockies for Girardi. So I've had part in both the catchers, which of course I took great pride.
Did you ever get back with the scouts who had dissed you over that?
No,
No,
you don't really.
You don't need to.
You don't need to.
It speaks for itself.
Yeah, you don't.
It
That's
does.
the best part
Yeah.
of it. You don't need to say anything.
I think
Yeah.
if you're a career scout, and Leon's been doing this for a long time, I mean, been in professional baseball for what, 30 years?
Yeah.
I mean,
About 25.
you're going to have hit and misses.
Yeah, you hit and miss, and that's part of the deal. When you do, you know, it's the thing is you just want to be, you're going to be wrong a lot because you get asked. I mean, I wrote 700-800 reports this year, and more than you do in amateur ball. So, you know, you're going to have better feelings for some guys than you do. But when you, like Joey said, when you're out, you maybe have 40 or 50 guys on your draft list in 3 or 4 states if you cover. So. I tell people, I said, you know, and they say, well, which is tougher? And I go, well, it's different. Watching minor league guys and major league guys like I do, I said, everybody says, well, did you see a good player today? Well, yeah. I mean, now if I'm scouting around here, and you know, I'm going to Fulton County or down to Memphis or somewhere, I might not see a good guy who I think is major league caliber for. So it's a relevant question, but it's totally different because what I do now is, you know, I'm watching everybody's minor league guys, and they at one time they were somebody's stud in high school or college, you know, to even be there. So it gets finite. Okay, is this guy going to be a little better than that guy? But like Joey said, you got hits and misses, and I said, well, I don't think you can. I'm glad that I had to go in the backwoods of Mississippi and watch a 17-year-old kid play on a gravel filled infield against a guy throwing 70 miles an hour to him and say to my bosses, this guy's going to be a Major League Baseball player in 5 years. So you're going to miss some of those guys too. But
Sure.
so it takes some, you know, it's fun. I mean, you got to enjoy a challenge. That's for sure. And if you've been around baseball, you know, you look for some God-given talent, and blah blah blah. And if he's, you know, you try to, if he's a good kid, work ethic, he's got room to grow, fill out, so many things involved. And you can still be wrong. You can do everything right, and the kid not make it, and you say, well, but no, you keep signing guys like that, somebody pops through. So.
It's the same thing as recruiting college football or college basketball
Oh,
players.
sure it is.
Some guys are top of the line, top 5 prospects in the country at their position, and they don't make it.
Sure.
And there's always unknown guys from Division II or NAIA schools that make it somehow.
So when I'm watching, I'm not a huge NBA guy or NFL guy. I do watch it, but I do, when they'll say, oh, this guy played at Mississippi Valley like Jerry Rice or something, well, I'll go, and in basketball, I love going and looking on the scouting services and seeing, you know, the 5-star, 3-star, 4-star. And people say, well, who do you root for in college basketball? And I said, well, gee, I like that Northern Iowa team. Why? I said, well, because there was nobody that was a 4 or 5-star guy. So the coach did a great job of he either got really lucky or he knew what he was doing and said, you know what, they're looking past this kid and he's actually better than what they think he is, which is kind of the business that I'm in. So I love other sports when I look and I see some guy from some little college, you know, or a basketball team in the NCAA, and you look and you said, you know, you can go back and say, well, geez, in 2008, none of these guys were 5-star guys, and now they're talking about one of the guys being an NBA guy, and they were like 2 or 3-star guys. So to me, I look at it different than most people. You know, they're either one team or the other, and I'm more like, I like this team this year because he's got a bunch of guys. That's what I do. I said, I know how difficult that is to get a guy that everybody looks past. So I look at it differently. I don't necessarily, I kind of like the coaches that do more with less.
Did you ever see Billy Wagner pitch in college?
I didn't see him, but I heard a lot about him.
Eddie Haas, who's from Paducah.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Eddie tells me the story one time. He went to watch Billy. Billy Wagner, one of the best left-hand relievers in the last 15 years, could throw about 100 miles an hour.
About 100 miles an hour.
Wagner played at a little Division III college in Virginia called Ferrum. And Eddie goes to scout him. Here, this left-hander can throw the heck out of the ball. And he goes there and he says the catcher is making like 20 pass balls a game because the catcher can't handle him. It's a Division III catcher, and he can't handle this kid. And he said the kid's stats are terrible because he's throwing wild pitches and pass balls all over the place. But he said, this guy's good. And they didn't draft him. I mean, he ended up going to the Astros, and he made a lot of money in the game. But you can find guys like that at little obscure places, and that's what baseball scouts have to do. They have to go to the smallest little podunk towns,
and you did
smallest podunk colleges, and try to find a player.
Oh, I went to a lot of the other way places, yeah. And so that's good sometimes when you're the only guy there, if they can play a little bit. I mean, that's, you know, it's. I said, you know, you got to have a little passion, and you know. If somebody says, "Well, where's Leon?" Oh, he's probably off in some little town, and most of the time they're not. But you got to go see them. And
well, when your area Leon's area for a long time was Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, probably.
Right.
I mean, you're going to a lot of dusty,
you still live in
out-of-the-way
Nashville?
places.
I have a place in Nashville. I have a place here.
So, tell us exactly what you do in baseball season. Where do you go? You leave out from Nashville and go where?
Well, I go to spring training, which is a great way to start the season. April's a tough month because you have to travel a little bit.
So where do the Brewers do their spring training?
Well, that doesn't necessarily that has no bearing on where I go. But we train in Phoenix.
But
I'm not going to watch our guys.
You're scouting other teams.
Yeah, I normally go to Florida and scout teams that you know, we tried. I had the National League East this year, so I had I was on the East Coast with the.
You're doing minor leaguers and major leaguers, right?
Yeah, I mean in the early part, yeah, and they have backfields and stuff like that. So I'll start out in late February last year, and I went to Florida, and watched 5 or 6 teams, and. The best part of it, spring training, why I said it was so good, is that you're limited in your travel. I just stayed, you know, I was in Melbourne to Jupiter and Port St. Lucie, you know, with the Mets and the Marlins and Washington were three of my National League East teams, and occasionally over to Orlando. So, so normally you're in the same spot, and so you don't travel,
right.
And you go see the games during the day. Your nights are free, which a lot of times as scouts we don't have. You've got, like say Joey scouts for the Cubs, and so maybe he lives up east, I don't see him. It's like we get together, hey, how's it going? What's going on? We're at the ball game, there's 20 scouts, we're watching, everybody's happy, everybody's excited. They've left freezing cold weather back home, so I have to say I'm a very fortunate fellow. I get to go to warm weather and watch baseball, and there's less pressure, there's less done. There's less done in spring training. Occasionally you're looking to say, okay, what's their excess going to be? And the Phillies have too many outfielders, and this guy's, they can't send him to the minors, or they might want to trade him. Well, their extra guy's better than one of our guys, so we might want to trade, or they might be a free agent, or they might do something like that. So, but there's less travel, which is the toughest part of my job.
Oh yeah.
And spring training is limited. You know, I'm usually a lot of times in the same stadium every day, so drive 5 minutes to the stadium and whatever. I watch BP, watch the game. And then after that, you know, it's nice and warm, it's Florida, everybody's happy, you can actually relax, go out and eat, and when the season gets going, you don't get a chance to do that a lot. It's go, go, go. But spring training's great.
I run into Leon in the summer a lot, talking. So where you been? He's hitting minor league parks all over this part of the country, basically. And we talk about Nelson Cruz for the Texas Rangers was a Brewer at one time, and I think you were a guy that scouted him, and they traded for him on your recommendation, if I remember right. I remember 5, 6 years ago, he and I having a conversation about Nelson Cruz. Well, back then, 2% of the country knows who Nelson Cruz is, just the diehard baseball people. I remember us having a lengthy conversation about what you could do. And it turns out this guy's been a quality player for the Texas Rangers.
How many times have you scouted teams for the World Series? With the Yankees, you scouted. How many times did you do that?
I did the Braves twice. Did the Phillies.
You did the Braves in '96 as well as '99?
'96, yeah. As well as '99. And well, I mean, I did that we actually played in the World Series.
A lot of times he's scouting teams that don't make it. So
yeah, I've scouted. I've scouted.
I remember the
I
first.
scouted a ton of teams that we didn't play or we didn't get there. I didn't get there.
The first time I remember hearing about you, I didn't hear your name, but after the World Series, I don't remember if it was '96 or '99, but it said that it was on one of the ESPN post-World Series broadcasts. They said that the Yankees they put scouts on hitters as well as pitchers, and is that unique? Do other teams do that now?
No, that's not unique. Most teams do that. Everybody does that. They'll usually have 2 scouts and one. It's so when you're advancing, you're writing down mostly every pitch. Although now this year actually we didn't because of all the video, and our video guys say no, we got that. We know what they're going to pitch. In the old days, you didn't. You know, you couldn't go back and look. All the games are on TV now, and so then you would have on a 2-1 pitch. Jimmy Key always throws a changeup on 2-1 to a number 3 or 4 hitter, blah, blah, blah. So it's way different than what you usually do, where I'm usually just scouting to grade a guy and say, well, if this guy becomes available for whatever reason, I would like to trade for him, or I rank him and this. And now I'm like, okay, how do I get Pujols out? Yeah, good luck. But, you know, so now this pitcher does this or this pitcher does that. They like to run on this count. Stuff of that. So it's a little much for one guy, although I have done that by myself before. Normally one guy says, so the guy takes the inning off, a half inning off, and says, okay, so he does the pitchers, and then the next inning you got the hitters. And so because you don't have time to go to the bathroom, you don't want to miss a pitch, so you're marking down everything that they do for the advancing part of it.
And there are benefits other than just scouting immediately. I mean, you see players that you think down the road, hey, this guy might help us. Leon and I talked this about Nigel Morgan, who the Brewers acquired from Washington, I think, wasn't it?
Correct. And
you'd scouted Morgan before and kind of liked what he brought to the team. And the Brewers needed a center fielder that can run and hit, and they trade for Nigel Morgan, and it turns out to be one of their most underrated players. And had a great year, probably his best year in the major leagues. And that's what scouts do. They file this stuff away for future reference. I mean, he might watch the Braves in September. But he might see somebody with the Braves that he thinks down the road, hey, we might want to take a chance on this guy sometime, and he may turn out to be a pretty good player for Milwaukee.
Yeah, somebody asked me today, they go, oh, you're home, you're on vacation. I mean, you're going to take a vacation, whatever. And I said, well, I probably won't travel, but this is when the hot stove season, and this is when what I do comes to fruition. I may end up being on the phone with my boss a lot between now and, Christmas. So I'm still working, and because he'll say, hey, the Yankees just said they would do this guy for that guy or whatever, or the Phillies or whoever I've seen. You saw him. Would you do this for that? So a lot of the stuff that I do, and not just this year, but like Joey said in the past, yeah, I've seen that guy. So now is when a lot of it comes to fruition. Now a lot of it is, 6-year free agents that I just turned in a whole list of guys becomes available November 21st, and there's definitely some guys I want, because you get to the point where you're like, okay, I've gotten some guys that have helped, and as a scout, you want to, sometimes a guy like Nigel Morgan, you see a guy, well, he doesn't the team doesn't want to trade him, and so you have to be fortunate to say this team's a match with us. They go, well, some years you're just not a match with the guys that you've seen, and some years that they say this team likes this. Who do you like on their team? And this year it seemed to happen a lot. Hairston I'd seen with Washington, and so Estrada the year before. So I had some guys that we had teams that we were. And
did y'all get Casey McGee that way somehow?
We got him from the Cubs, and he was just like a 6-year free agent.
Yeah, okay. I mean, he was just a guy that couldn't ever make it with the Cubs and pops up and has 2 good years in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Right.
So
and somebody had to scout him and see him. And
so then, and so right now is when a lot of stuff happens. Trades happen, guys become free agents. A team can only put so many guys on their roster, and then you try to cherry pick them and you try to pick the best of the rest and blah blah blah. So there's Rule 5 guys that you pay to get, and there was a ton of guys out in the Arizona Fall League where I just came from. So a lot of it may come to fruition, and then sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you go, like, boy, you got this guy, and they'll say, you know, you like that guy. You had him right, but you didn't trade for him. And so your boss says, boy, you know, maybe we should have done that. But you get no credit for it. You don't have the guy. And everybody's got recommendations, so, you know, everybody can't get who they want, whatever. And so
here's one example of that.
I was going to say.
Josh Hamilton for the Texas Rangers,
right.
of course,
oh, yeah.
well documented all the problems he's had in the past. The Cubs had him for about 10 minutes. Because the Reds went to the Cubs a few years ago and said, "Hey, we want to trade you this guy. We want this. We want you to pick somebody in the Rule 5 draft, and we're going to trade you this minor leaguer for him." And the Cubs said, "Okay, we'll do it, and we'll tell you who it is when it comes time to pick." Comes time to pick, and the Reds tell the Cubs, "We want Josh Hamilton." And the Cubs have already agreed to trade him, so they had him for like 10 minutes, and Josh Hamilton turns into a star and just stuff like that. But those are scouts that see these guys and say, "Hey, let's take a chance on getting this guy." And if you get those guys cheap and they turn out, look how it's paying out.
We've got about a minute left, and I'm going to let you guys take a chance. Where are the top free agents going to go? Your opinion. Name anybody. You got 1 minute.
I think the Reyes to the Marlins, Jose Reyes for the Mets, the shortstop, to the Marlins makes a lot of sense. They can move Hanley Ramirez to probably center field, maybe a third base. Depending on if they sign this Cuban defector, they're supposedly wanting to get him too, who can play outfield. Reyes to the Marlins I think Reyes to a lot of teams makes a lot of sense. But I think the Marlins especially, because they can move, Ramirez is not that good at defensive shortstop, but he can hit.
Okay, who else? We're running out of time now.
Prince Fielders, I think Prince is going to the American League somewhere. I'm not totally sure where. I think Baltimore, Seattle both make sense to me.
Okay.
Reyes to the Marlins, they need a presence there. It's a brand new stadium. It's either going to be he or Pujols. I don't know that Pujols will. It's one of the two. The Marlins will make a splash.
A Latin presence
with a Latin
in Miami.
Presence, with a Latin presence in Miami. That's number one.
Who else? Who else? Pitchers.
I'm not sure who's on the market right now.
Well, there's not that many. I'm trying to think myself. You kind of caught me off guard.
It's all the big three are Reyes, Pujols, and Fielder.
Yeah,
I mean,
those are the big.
And really, those dominoes have to fall first, probably before some of the other ones do. The Cubs, I don't think the Cubs are going to go for a Pujols. Maybe a Fielder, possibly.
I'm afraid our dominoes have completely fallen. He says we're out of time. So we'll let you're off the hook on the pitchers. We'll do that some other time. So, thanks for joining us. My guests today were Leon Wurth and Joey Fosko, and thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.